"Give me a son and leave the castle," the Duke ordered on their wedding night, but she turned his own dynasty against him and made him pay for every cruel word. The carriage wheels ground against cobblestone with a finality that echoed in Isadora's chest. Through the narrow window, Ravensshire Castle rose against the October sky like something carved from winter itself. Stone towers that caught no warmth from the dying light, windows that reflected nothing back. She pressed her gloved fingers against the leather seat, anchoring herself in this last moment before everything she understood about her life would be rewritten. She had been prepared for this night since she was 7 years old. Her governess had taught her to walk with perfect posture, to speak only when spoken to smile without showing teeth, to understand that women of noble blood did not choose their destinies, they fulfilled them. Marriage was duty. Children were continuation. Love was a luxury that practical families could not afford. The carriage lurched to a halt. Through the window, she could see servants arranging themselves in precise formation, their faces carefully empty of expression. Even they knew what she was walking into, a transaction dressed in silk and ceremony. Her new husband stood at the castle's entrance, tall and severe in his formal attire. Alaric, Duke of Ravensshire, possessed the kind of austere handsomeness that made other women speak of him in whispers, but Isadora had learned to read faces during her years of preparation. His eyes held nothing for her, no curiosity, no warmth, not even polite interest. She was inventory being delivered. The carriage door opened. Cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of approaching winter and something else, resignation perhaps, or the particular stillness that came before irreversible change. "Your Grace," the footman murmured, offering his hand. She accepted it and stepped onto ground that was now hers by law but would never be hers by choice. The wedding ceremony had taken place 3 hours earlier in the cathedral, witnessed by 200 guests who applauded at appropriate moments and pretended not to notice the complete absence of affection between bride and groom. Now came the private reckoning. Alaric approached with measured steps. "Duchess," he said, his voice carrying the practiced courtesy of a man who had learned to navigate social requirements without feeling them. "I trust the journey was comfortable." "Adequate," she replied, because adequate was all any of this would ever be. He offered his arm and she took it, allowing him to escort her through doors that closed behind them with the soft, definitive sound of a cage locking. The great hall stretched before them, all shadows and ancient tapestries that seemed to watch her passage. Servants bowed as they passed, but their deference felt rehearsed, as though they too were performing parts in a play whose ending everyone knew. They climbed the stone staircase in silence. Each step echoed, a countdown to a conversation Isadora had dreaded and prepared for in equal measure. She had convinced herself that honesty would be preferable to false promises, that clarity would be easier to navigate than pretense. She had been wrong about many things but perhaps not about this. The Duchess's chambers, her chambers now, were elegant and cold, decorated in deep blues and silver that complement her dark hair and pale skin. Someone had thought carefully about the details, ensuring that everything looked appropriate for the woman who would bear the Ravensshire heir. The effect was beautiful and utterly impersonal, like a portrait painted of someone the artist had never met. Alaric dismissed the servants with a gesture. When the door closed behind the last of them, he turned to face her fully for the first time since the ceremony. In the lamplight, she could see new details. The precise way he held his shoulders, the slight tension around his eyes that suggested this conversation cost him something too. "I believe we should discuss the terms of our arrangement," he said without preamble. Isadora's spine straightened involuntarily. She had expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a physical blow. "Terms?" "Yes." He moved to pour himself a glass of wine from a decanter on the side table, but did not offer her one. "This marriage serves a specific purpose. Your family gains the protection and elevation that comes with the Ravensshire name. Mine gains the political alliances and financial stability that your father's connections provide. These are practical necessities." She watched his face as he spoke, searching for any crack in his composure, any sign that he felt the brutality of reducing her to a series of advantages. There was none. "You will provide an heir," he continued, his tone remaining clinical. "After that obligation is fulfilled, you will maintain the public dignity appropriate to your position, but our private lives will remain separate. I will not interfere with your domestic arrangements, and I ask that you extend the same courtesy to me." The words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Isadora felt something inside her chest contract, but she refused to let it show on her face. She had learned, during her careful upbringing, that dignity was often the only thing a woman could keep entirely for herself. I understand, she said quietly. Good. Alaric set down his wineglass and moved toward the connecting door to his own chambers. Then he paused, perhaps registering something in her tone that made him glance back. This arrangement benefits us both, Duchess. There will be no pretense of affection to navigate, no expectations to disappoint. Clarity serves us better than sentiment. After he left, Isadora stood alone in the center of her new life, surrounded by furniture chosen by strangers and curtains that would frame years of careful loneliness. She had entered this marriage prepared for duty, but nothing had prepared her for how completely he would erase the possibility of anything more. Outside, wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in the castle's depths, a clock chimed the hour. The sound seemed to mark not just time passing but time beginning, the start of a life she would have to build one careful, strategic piece at a time. The morning light that filtered through the tall windows of Isadora's chambers carried no warmth. She had awakened before dawn, dressed herself without calling for assistance, and spent the early hours learning the geography of her new prison. The Duchess's quarters were larger than her childhood home's entire second floor, but luxury meant nothing when it was distributed across rooms that echoed with her solitary footsteps. She had chosen a deep green dress, practical, elegant, and the color of armor. Today would bring her first appearance as the Duchess of Ravensshire at the morning meal, where the household staff and any guests would observe how the new arrangement functioned. She needed to establish herself not as a victim, but as someone who understood the rules and played them expertly. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called. A woman in her 50s appeared, carrying herself with the precise authority that only came from years of managing noble households. Her graying hair was pulled back severely, and her dark dress marked her as upper staff, the head housekeeper perhaps or personal secretary. "Your Grace," the woman said, offering a careful curtsy. "I am Mrs. Whitmore, the castle's chief steward. His Grace has asked me to acquaint you with the household schedule and your anticipated duties." Anticipated duties? Even the servants spoke in euphemisms. "Of course," Isadora replied. "Please be seated." Mrs. Whitmore remained standing. "Thank you, Your Grace, but I prefer to stand during business discussions." She produced a leather portfolio from beneath her arm. "The Duke maintains a structured daily routine. Breakfast is served at 8 o'clock in the smaller dining room. He prefers to dine alone, but should you wish to join him, a place will be set." The message was clear. She was welcome but not expected. Optional. Luncheon is served at 1 o'clock, typically for any guests or visiting relatives. Dinner is at 7, which is... Mrs. Whitmore paused delicately, "where your presence would be most beneficial for maintaining proper appearances." "I see." Isadora moved to the window, looking down at the courtyard where servants went about their morning tasks. "And my other responsibilities?" The Duchess traditionally oversees charitable works within the duchy, manages correspondence related to social obligations, and receives callers on Thursday afternoons. Mrs. Whitmore's tone suggested these were time-filling activities rather than meaningful work. The Duke handles all matters related to estate management, political obligations, and financial oversight. Everything that mattered, in other words. Isadora was to be a beautiful, benevolent figurehead who smiled at appropriate moments and signed her name to pre-written letters about orphanages and church roof repairs. "Mrs. Whitmore," Isadora said carefully, "how long have you served this household?" 15 years, Your Grace. I came when the previous Duke, His Grace's father, required additional oversight of the domestic arrangements. Then you understand how things truly operate here." Something flickered in the older woman's eyes, surprise perhaps or cautious interest. "I understand efficiency, Your Grace. And discretion." Isadora turned from the window. "I would like to see the household accounts. Not the duchy's finances, which I understand are not my concern, but the domestic expenditures. Food, staff wages, maintenance. The practical details of how this place functions." Mrs. Whitmore's expression became carefully neutral. "Those records are typically reviewed only by the person responsible for the household's daily operations," Isadora finished smoothly. "Which would be me, unless His Grace prefers to personally oversee laundry schedules and menu planning." A pause stretched between them. Mrs. Whitmore was evaluating her, Isadora realized, trying to determine whether the new Duchess was naive enough to think she had real authority, or clever enough to understand the difference between having authority and wielding it effectively. "I will have the relevant documents prepared for your review," Mrs. Whitmore said finally. "Thank you. And I would like to meet with the head of household staff, the cook, and whoever manages the castle's correspondence." "All of them, Your Grace?" "All of them." This afternoon if possible. After Mrs. Whitmore departed, Isadora made her way to the smaller dining room for breakfast. The space was elegant but intimate, designed for family meals rather than formal entertaining. Alaric sat at the head of the table, reading correspondence while he consumed his meal with mechanical precision. He glanced up when she entered, a brief flicker of something, surprise? Annoyance? Crossing his features. "Duchess?" he said, rising briefly in acknowledgement before returning to his papers. "Your Grace." She took the seat that had obviously been prepared for her, noting that the setting was placed at the far end of the table, close enough to demonstrate marital unity, distant enough to prevent conversation. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the soft clink of silverware and the rustle of paper as Alaric continued reading. Isadora studied him covertly, trying to understand the man behind the careful construction. His movements were economical, controlled, suggesting someone who had learned to waste nothing. Not motion, not words, not emotion. "Mrs. Whitmore informed me of the household schedule," she said finally. "Good." He did not look up from his letter. "I've requested to review the domestic accounts." Now he paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "For what purpose?" "To understand how the household operates. If I'm to fulfill my role properly, I should know how decisions are made and resources allocated." Alaric set down his fork and gave her his full attention for the first time since she'd entered the room. "Your role requires you to appear at social functions and manage charitable obligations. The household runs efficiently without additional oversight." "I'm sure it does. But I prefer to understand my environment thoroughly." Something shifted in his expression, a calculation being performed behind his dark eyes. "You will find that the staff here are exceptionally competent. They require little guidance." "I have no intention of disrupting effective systems," Isadora replied calmly. "But I also have no intention of being decorative." The word hung between them, carrying implications that neither of them addressed directly. Alaric studied her face as though seeing her clearly for the first time, and Isadora met his gaze steadily, letting him see exactly what he had acquired, not a compliant ornament, but a woman who understood power and intended to find her own way to wield it. After a long moment, he picked up his fork and returned to his breakfast. "As you wish, Duchess. Mrs. Whitmore will accommodate your requests." It was permission granted reluctantly, but it was permission nonetheless. Isadora finished her meal in silence, already planning her afternoon meetings. She would learn every detail of how Ravensshire Castle functioned, and then she would begin the careful work of making herself indispensable to its operation. The Duke wanted functionality from their marriage. She would give him exactly that, but on terms that served her purposes as well as his. Chapter 3. By Thursday afternoon, Isadora had begun mapping the castle's true power structure through household accounts and staff conversations. The morning room, arranged for her first formal receiving day, reflected careful staging. Her chair positioned for authority, guest seating designed to create calculated intimacy or distance. Mrs. Whitmore announced Lady Pemberton and her daughter Miss Catherine, neighbors whose elaborate dress and nervous energy marked them as information gatherers rather than genuine callers. "Your Grace," Lady Pemberton began after pleasantries, "Miss Catherine has been much admired this season. Several young gentlemen of excellent families have shown interest." Isadora deflected smoothly. "How wonderful. I'm sure she'll choose wisely when the time comes." Lady Pemberton's expression tightened at the polite dismissal. "Of course, we quite understand the unique circumstances of your Grace's own arrangement. Such a practical approach to marriage. How refreshing to see young people who understand that lasting alliances are built on more than mere sentiment." The insult was delicately delivered but unmistakable. Isadora set down her teacup with deliberate calm. "Indeed. His Grace and I share deep appreciation for our responsibilities. We find great satisfaction in building something of lasting value together." The response acknowledged her marriage's transactional nature while suggesting it had evolved into something substantial. Lady Pemberton looked momentarily wrong-footed, her barb deflected by unexpected armor. After the Pembertons departed, Mrs. Whitmore returned to oversee tea service cleanup. "How illuminating was the visit?" Isadora asked carefully. Mrs. Whitmore dismissed the servants and closed the door. "Your Grace should understand that certain aspects of His Grace's character have been speculated upon for years." "What kind of speculation?" "There was a previous attachment. It ended badly. His Grace has since resisted romantic entanglements. When his engagement was announced, many assumed purely dynastic necessity." Isadora absorbed this without expression change. These assumptions have been validated by observed behavior? His Grace maintains privacy very carefully. Perhaps too carefully for those inclined to draw conclusions. The implication was clear. Alaric's determination to keep their marriage functional was being interpreted as evidence of his inability to feel anything for his wife. Their correct, courteous, but completely cold public interactions provided ammunition for anyone seeking to diminish the Duchess's position. That evening at dinner, Alaric read correspondence between courses, seeming preoccupied. "I received Lady Pemberton today," Isidora mentioned during a lull. "Ah." Politely disinterested. She seemed quite confident about our personal arrangements. This time he looked up, expression sharpening. "Meaning?" "Our marriage appears to be general discussion. People believe they understand exactly what we are to each other." "Which is?" "Strangers fulfilling obligation. A business arrangement without personal dimension." "Which it is." "Which it is," Isidora agreed calmly. "But whether that perception serves your interests or makes you appear weak, is the question." Alaric's jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was controlled. "I fail to see how clarity constitutes weakness. Clarity is one thing. Being perceived as a man who cannot inspire loyalty or affection in his own wife is entirely another." She had struck home. Alaric's face went still, and for a moment she glimpsed something beneath his construction, pride, perhaps, or pain. Then his expression smoothed back to neutrality. "What are you suggesting, Duchess?" "That we consider whether our public behavior adequately protects both our interests. A marriage appearing purely transactional can be easily undermined by anyone wishing to suggest the Duke of Ravensshire cannot secure genuine loyalty even from those closest to him." It was calculated argument, appealing to political rather than emotional instincts. Isidora watched him process implications, seeing the moment he recognized the vulnerability she'd identified. "What would you propose?" he asked finally. "Nothing dramatic. Simply public courtesy suggesting mutual respect rather than mere tolerance. Small gestures indicating we are partners rather than strangers who happen to share a household." Alaric was silent, fingers drumming against the table in rare nervous display. "Very well," he said at last. "We will appear compatible. But private arrangement terms remain unchanged." "Of course," Isidora replied as though she'd never suggested otherwise. Returning to her chambers that night, she wondered whether the line between public performance and private reality was as fixed as the Duke believed. Human nature, in her experience, was remarkably adaptable. People who acted like partners often discovered they had become partners, regardless of original intentions. The game was beginning and she intended to play it expertly. The first test of their new public arrangement came 3 days later at a dinner party for visiting dignitaries from the neighboring duchy. Isidora spent the afternoon reviewing guest details with Mrs. Whitmore, memorizing names, titles, and the subtle political allegiances that would determine seating arrangements and conversation topics. "Lord Ashford arrives with his eldest son," Mrs. Whitmore explained, consulting her notes. "He's been seeking advantageous marriages for his children and may attempt to use the evening for informal negotiations. Lady Ashford prefers to discuss artistic patronage, but her real interest is gathering information about household management practices." Isidora nodded, understanding that every seemingly casual interaction would serve multiple purposes. "And the others?" "Sir Edmund Hartwell represents the merchant interests in his region. Wealthy but seeking social elevation. His wife is newly titled and somewhat uncertain about protocol. They may require gentle guidance to avoid embarrassment." By evening, Isidora had transformed herself into the perfect duchess, elegant in deep burgundy silk that complemented her dark hair, jewelry chosen to suggest prosperity without ostentation. When she descended to the drawing room where guests gathered before dinner, she found Alaric already present, immaculate in formal attire and displaying the kind of effortless authority that made other men unconsciously straighten their postures in his presence. He turned as she entered, and for the first time since their wedding night, offered her his arm with what appeared to be genuine courtesy rather than mere obligation. "Duchess," he said, his voice carrying subtle warmth that would be noted by everyone present. "You look magnificent." The compliment was unexpected, delivered with enough sincerity to make her pause momentarily. She recovered smoothly, placing her hand on his arm and allowing him to escort her into the group. "Lord Ashford, Lady Ashford," Alaric said, guiding her toward their most important guests. "May I present my wife, the Duchess of Ravensshire." The introduction was standard protocol, but something in his tone suggested pride rather than mere formality. Lady Ashford's eyes sharpened with interest as she curtsied. "Your Grace, what a pleasure. I've heard such intriguing things about your innovations in household management." Isadora smiled gracefully. "I've been fortunate to work with such experienced staff. Mrs. Whitmore has been invaluable in helping me understand how to serve the duchy's interests most effectively." It was a careful response that credited others while subtly establishing her own competence. Lord Ashford nodded approvingly. Practical approach. Essential in these times. Throughout the evening, Isadora found herself conducting an intricate performance. During dinner conversation, she deferred to Alaric on political matters while contributing observations that demonstrated intelligence without overstepping boundaries. When Lady Hartwell made a nervous error about precedence, Isadora corrected it so smoothly that the woman appeared informed rather than ignorant. Most importantly, she began to understand the subtle dance required to make their marriage appear functional. When Alaric made a particularly astute observation about trade negotiations, she offered a small smile of appreciation. When she successfully navigated a delicate conversation about local charitable obligations, he inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. To observers, they appeared to be partners who respected each other's capabilities and took satisfaction in each other's successes. The performance required no false displays of affection, only the kind of mutual regard that might exist between allies who had learned to work together effectively. The evening's crucial moment came during after-dinner conversation in the drawing room. Sir Edmund Hartwell, emboldened by wine and the informal atmosphere, made an observation that tested everyone's diplomatic skills. "Remarkable how quickly you've settled into your new position, Your Grace," he said to Isadora. "Some wives take years to understand their husbands' particular requirements." The comment carried implications about both her adaptability and Alaric's supposedly difficult nature. The room went subtly quiet, everyone recognizing the delicate territory Sir Edmund had wandered into. Isadora smiled serenely. "I found that understanding comes naturally when two people share similar values about what truly matters." She looked toward Alaric as she spoke, and he met her gaze with what appeared to be genuine warmth. To everyone watching, the exchange suggested a couple who had discovered unexpected compatibility despite their arranged beginning. "His Grace and I both believe that the responsibilities we've inherited require our complete dedication," she continued. "It's remarkably easy to work together when you're committed to the same goals." Alaric nodded, adding, "I've been consistently impressed by the Duchess's insight into matters I hadn't expected would interest her. She has a gift for seeing solutions I might have overlooked." It was not effusive praise, but coming from the notoriously reserved Duke of Ravensshire, it carried significant weight. Lady Ashford looked intrigued, while Sir Edmund appeared slightly chagrined at having misjudged the dynamic he'd attempted to probe. Later, as guests departed and Isadora and Alaric stood together in the entry hall offering farewells, she noticed how naturally they had fallen into synchronized courtesy. They moved with the unconscious coordination of people accustomed to working together, anticipating each other's actions and filling conversational gaps seamlessly. After the last carriage disappeared into the night, they found themselves alone in the sudden quiet of the great hall. Alaric turned to her, and for a moment his formal composure relaxed slightly. "That was well managed," he said, his tone carrying genuine appreciation rather than mere acknowledgement. "Thank you. I believe the evening served its purpose." "Yes." He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "Your observation about Sir Edmund's wine consumption was particularly astute. I might have missed the extent to which it was affecting his discretion." Isadora had quietly signaled to servants to slow his wine service, preventing potential embarrassment without making the intervention obvious. That Alaric had noticed her management of the situation suggested he was paying closer attention to her actions than she had realized. "Small details matter," she replied simply. "Indeed they do." They stood for a moment in comfortable silence, and Isadora found herself wondering whether the evening's success had surprised him. She had demonstrated competence that went beyond mere social decorativeness, contributing real value to his political and social objectives. "Good night, Duchess," he said finally, offering a slight bow that carried more respect than their usual perfunctory courtesies. "Good night, Your Grace." As she climbed the stairs to her chambers, Isadora reflected on the evening's significance. They had successfully created the appearance of a functional partnership, but more importantly, they had discovered that such a partnership might actually be achievable. The line between performance and reality was beginning to blur in ways that might serve both their interests. The weeks following the successful dinner party brought subtle shifts in the castle's atmosphere. Isadora found herself increasingly consulted on matters previously decided without her input. Guest lists, menu planning for political events, even the delicate question of which local families should receive invitations to the upcoming Harvest Festival. She was reviewing correspondence when Mrs. Whitmore appeared with unusual news. "Your Grace, we've received a rather unusual request. Miss Evangeline Morrison has written asking for a private audience." Isadora recognized the name from her study of regional politics. Lord Morrison's eldest daughter? Indeed. Though the family has been distant from court circles since certain financial difficulties arose last year. The euphemism was clear. Lord Morrison had made poor investments and now faced reduced circumstances. His daughter's request suggested desperation rather than social courtesy. What does she seek? She wishes to discuss educational opportunities for young women. Rather vague phrasing, but given their circumstances. She's seeking patronage, Isadora finished. Something that might restore their social standing while appearing to serve broader interests. Supporting the Morrison family could be seen as either charitable wisdom or naive manipulation. More importantly, it would be her first independent decision with significant political ramifications. Schedule the meeting, she decided. But inform His Grace of the request first. That evening at dinner, she raised the matter during their increasingly comfortable business conversations. "The Morrison family has approached us through their daughter," she said without preamble. Alaric looked up, eyebrows rising. Evangeline Morrison? Her father's recent difficulties have made him something of a pariah. Which may be precisely why she's attempting to rebuild connections through charitable endeavors rather than direct social rehabilitation. What specifically does she propose? Isadora described the vague references to education, watching Alaric process implications. His expression grew thoughtful rather than dismissive. If approached carefully, supporting education for young women could serve multiple purposes, she continued. It positions us as progressive without being radical, demonstrates practical charity, and potentially creates loyalty among benefiting families. And if approached incorrectly? We appear naive enough to be manipulated by desperate families exploiting our generosity. Alaric set down his fork, giving her full attention. You understand the risks. I understand that every significant decision involves risks. The question is whether potential benefits justify them. What would you propose? Meet with Miss Morrison to understand her proposals. If they have merit, develop them into something larger than mere family rehabilitation. A genuine program serving the duchy's interests while incidentally benefiting the Morrisons. If her proposals lack substance, decline gracefully while leaving room for future cooperation. You would turn potential manipulation into legitimate initiative? I would ensure any assistance serves our interests as well as theirs. Charity benefiting only recipients is rarely sustainable. Charity creating mutual advantage tends to endure. Alaric was quiet, fingers drumming thoughtfully. Very well, he said finally. Meet with Miss Morrison. But I want to review any commitments before they're made final. 3 days later, Evangeline Morrison arrived dressed in clothing that showed subtle signs of careful maintenance rather than replacement. Perhaps 25, with intelligent eyes and controlled desperation that came from watching one's social position crumble. Your Grace, I'm deeply grateful for your willingness to see me. Isadora gestured toward seating arranged for honest conversation. I understand you have proposals regarding educational opportunities? Yes, Your Grace. I've been considering challenges facing young women of modest circumstances who possess intelligence but lack connections for advantageous marriages or employment. Evangeline outlined a surprisingly well-developed plan for establishing a small school providing practical education to daughters of tenant farmers and minor tradespeople. The curriculum would include literacy, mathematics, household management, and elementary law and commerce, skills making them valuable as governesses, companions, or wives to ambitious men seeking intelligent partners. Initial costs would be modest, and the school could become self-sustaining through fees from families whose daughters benefit, plus placement fees from employers seeking qualified staff. Isadora listened carefully, recognizing both genuine merit and calculated appeal to her known interests. Evangeline had researched her audience. And your role in such an enterprise? I would serve as headmistress, drawing upon my education and my family's reduced circumstances to understand both student needs and practical requirements of managing limited resources. A diplomatic acknowledgement that financial difficulties had given her relevant experience, qualification benefiting the school while providing respectable employment. An interesting proposal, Isadora said carefully. I'll need to consider implications and discuss with His Grace before making commitments. After Evangeline departed, Isadora spent the afternoon refining the proposal into something addressing Alaric's likely concerns while maximizing potential benefits. By evening she was prepared to present not just Evangeline's idea, but her own vision of how it might serve the duchy's broader interests. The conversation would determine whether her growing influence was based on genuine competence or merely Alaric's willingness to humor her involvement in limited matters. She intended to demonstrate she could navigate complex political decisions with the same skill shown in managing household operations. The test had arrived and she was ready. That evening, Alaric was waiting in the library rather than the dining room when Isadora descended for dinner. The room's atmosphere suggested serious discussion. Papers spread across the heavy oak table, wine already poured, and the careful arrangement of chairs that indicated he wanted to review her conclusions in detail. "I've been thinking about the Morrison proposal," he said without preamble as she entered. "As have I." Isadora settled into the chair he indicated, noting that he had positioned them as collaborators rather than maintaining the formal distance of their usual interactions. "What are your conclusions?" She had spent the afternoon developing her analysis into a comprehensive assessment. "Miss Morrison's proposal has genuine merit, but it also presents an opportunity for something more significant than she realizes. The question is whether we want to simply help one desperate family or create something that serves our long-term interests." Alaric leaned back slightly, his expression indicating she had his complete attention. "Explain." "A school for practical education could serve multiple purposes beyond charity. First, it creates a pool of qualified women for employment in noble households, governesses, companions, secretaries who understand both practical skills and social requirements. Second, it demonstrates progressive thinking without threatening established order. Third, it provides a legitimate avenue for supporting families who face temporary difficulties while requiring them to contribute meaningfully to their own rehabilitation." "You're suggesting we expand her proposal." "I'm suggesting we transform it into something that benefits the duchy as much as it benefits individual students." Isadora pulled out the notes she had prepared. "What if we established not just a school but a network of training and placement? Students receive education, graduates find appropriate employment, employers access qualified staff, and we maintain oversight ensuring both quality and loyalty." Alaric studied her notes, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful. "The financial requirements? Initial investment would be modest, perhaps converting one of the unused manor houses into a proper school building, supporting 3 or 4 instructors including Miss Morrison, and providing basic supplies for 20 students. The program could become self-sustaining within 2 years through fees and placements." "And the political implications?" "Carefully managed, it positions us as practical innovators rather than radical reformers. We're providing opportunity, not challenging social structure. Students learn to serve established families more effectively, not to overthrow existing arrangements." Alaric was quiet for several minutes, reviewing her analysis with the thoroughness she had learned indicated serious consideration. When he looked up, his expression carried a quality she hadn't seen before, something approaching respect. "This is considerably more sophisticated than Miss Morrison's original proposal," he said finally. "Her idea provided the foundation, but implementation requires broader vision." "Indeed." He poured himself more wine, then offered the decanter to her, a small gesture, but one that acknowledged her as an equal participant in their discussion rather than merely someone he was humoring. "What would you see as your role in such an enterprise?" The question carried implications beyond its surface meaning. He was asking whether she intended to involve herself meaningfully in the project's execution or simply provide initial approval and then withdraw. "Direct oversight at least initially," she replied without hesitation. "This succeeds or fails based on details: curriculum development, instructor selection, student evaluation, placement coordination. Those decisions determine whether we create something valuable or simply appear to be playing at charity. You would commit significant time and attention to making it function properly. I would commit whatever time and attention are necessary to ensure it serves our purposes effectively." Alaric nodded slowly, and she sensed he was reassessing not just the proposal but her capabilities as well. "Very well. Draft a comprehensive plan for my review. If it addresses my concerns adequately, we'll proceed." The authorization was more significant than it appeared. He was granting her authority to develop and oversee a substantial initiative that would affect multiple families and require ongoing political management. It represented genuine responsibility rather than decorative involvement. "Thank you," she said simply. Don't thank me yet. If this fails, the consequences reflect on both of us. I'm trusting your judgment that the benefits justify the risks. The warning carried weight, but it also carried acknowledgement that her judgment was worth trusting. After 6 weeks of marriage, they had evolved from strangers fulfilling obligations to partners capable of collaborating on complex decisions. Over the following days, Isadora threw herself into developing detailed plans with an intensity that surprised her. She found herself energized by work that mattered, by the challenge of creating something that would outlast the immediate transaction of helping one desperate family. She consulted with Mrs. Whitmore about practical requirements, corresponded with families who might provide the first group of students, and even traveled to inspect the manor house Alaric had suggested for conversion. Each detail required careful consideration of how it would serve the project's broader purposes while remaining financially sustainable. The work also provided opportunities for collaboration with Alaric that went beyond their careful public performances. He reviewed her plans with genuine engagement, offering suggestions that demonstrated both political acuity and practical understanding of implementation challenges. Their discussions became increasingly natural, marked by the comfortable back and forth of people who had learned to trust each other's expertise. One evening, as they worked late in the library reviewing instructor qualifications, Isadora realized that the careful distance they had maintained was gradually dissolving into something more functional. They moved around each other with unconscious coordination, anticipated each other's questions, and built upon each other's ideas with the efficiency of genuine partnership. This candidate, Alaric said, indicating a letter of application, has excellent references but may be overqualified for what we're offering. She might accept temporarily but leave for a better position. Possibly, Isadora agreed, but she also might appreciate the opportunity to shape something from the beginning rather than simply filling an established role. Some people find innovation more appealing than security. Speaking from experience? His tone carried mild amusement rather than criticism. Perhaps. She met his gaze directly. Some circumstances that appear limiting initially can prove more interesting than expected. The comment hung between them, carrying implications about more than just employment decisions. For a moment, the careful boundaries of their arrangement seemed less fixed than either had assumed. Then Alaric returned his attention to the applications, but not before she caught a fleeting expression that suggested he was reconsidering certain assumptions about their marriage as well. The project was succeeding beyond her original expectations, but it was also creating changes she hadn't anticipated, changes that went far beyond the establishment of a school for young women. The Morrison School for Young Women opened 6 weeks later in the renovated Westbrook Manor, a graceful building that had stood empty since Alaric's great-aunt passed 5 years earlier. Isadora had overseen every detail, from dormitory arrangements to the library selection that would serve as both classroom and symbol of the institution's serious purpose. On opening day, she stood in the main hall watching 20 carefully selected students arrive with modest belongings and enormous hopes. Their families represented the duchy's emerging middle class, prosperous farmers, skilled craftsmen, minor clerks, people who understood education's value but lacked connections to secure it for their daughters. Nervous? Alaric asked quietly, appearing beside her as the last carriage departed. Determined, she replied, surprising herself with the honesty. This succeeds and we've created something genuinely valuable. This fails and every political enemy you've ever made will use it as evidence of poor judgment. No pressure then. She glanced at him, noting the dry humor that had become increasingly common in their private conversations. None at all. Miss Morrison, now properly Miss Evangeline, the school's headmistress, approached with gratitude and professional determination that had convinced Isadora she was the right choice. Your Grace, she said, curtsying to Alaric before turning to Isadora, the students are settled and eager to begin. Classes commence tomorrow morning. Excellent. Isadora had spent considerable time developing curriculum that balanced practical skills with intellectual development. Remember, we're not simply preparing them for employment. We're preparing them to excel in whatever positions they ultimately secure. The distinction mattered. Graduates who merely fulfilled basic requirements would reflect adequately on the school. Graduates who exceeded expectations would create demand for future students and establish the institution's reputation for excellence. Over the following weeks, Isadora divided time between established duties and regular visits to Westbrook Manor. She reviewed lesson plans, observed classes, and most importantly, began developing relationships with local families who might employ graduates. The placement network she had envisioned was proving even more crucial than anticipated. The work also brought unexpected collaboration with Alaric. He had initially viewed the school as her project requiring his approval, but gradually became genuinely involved. His political connections proved invaluable for securing employment opportunities, while his business acumen helped refine the financial model ensuring sustainability. Lady Hartford is seeking a new companion, he mentioned one evening as they reviewed correspondence in what had become their shared office routine. Someone capable of managing her social calendar and correspondence. Might be suitable for one of our more advanced students. Miss Rebecca Thompson, Isadora replied immediately. Excellent handwriting, quick with numbers, and sophisticated enough to navigate Lady Hartford's particular requirements without being intimidated. You think Miss Thompson can handle Lady Hartford's temper? Miss Thompson has been managing her own family's finances since her father's injury. Lady Hartford's temper will seem manageable by comparison. These conversations had become natural extensions of their dinner discussions, representing genuine collaboration on shared objectives rather than parallel management of separate responsibilities. They were building something together, and success required them to function as authentic partners. The first real test came when Sir Edmund Hartwell requested a private meeting regarding concerns about the school's social implications. Isadora suspected the concerns were less about social implications and more about missed opportunities for his own benefit. Sir Edmund arrived with his wife and an agenda that quickly proved Isadora's suspicions correct. After perfunctory congratulations, he began probing for ways to involve his family in the project's leadership. Lady Hartwell has considerable experience with charitable endeavors, he suggested. Perhaps there's opportunity for collaboration in developing additional programs. Isadora recognized the maneuvering immediately. The Hartwells wanted to associate themselves with anticipated success while contributing minimal effort or resources. How thoughtful, she replied smoothly. What specific programs does Lady Hartwell envision? Lady Hartwell launched into vague descriptions of cultural enrichment and moral instruction, requiring significant funding but producing uncertain benefits. Precisely the kind of unfocused philanthropy that looked generous but accomplished little. Interesting concepts, Alaric interjected. Of course, any additional programs would need to serve the school's core mission of preparing students for practical employment. We've found that focus is essential for producing measurable results. The redirection acknowledged Lady Hartwell's suggestions while making clear that superficial additions wouldn't be accommodated. Perhaps, Isadora added, Lady Hartwell might consider supporting our placement network by identifying employment opportunities within her own social circle. We're always seeking families who appreciate well-trained staff. A diplomatic way of suggesting the Hartwells could contribute by actually hiring graduates rather than simply associating themselves with the school's reputation. After the Hartwells departed with promises to consider how they might best contribute, Alaric turned to Isadora with unmistakable approval. Skillfully handled. You offered them exactly the involvement that would benefit the school while making clear that symbolic participation wouldn't be sufficient. As autumn deepened, the school's success began generating attention beyond their immediate region. The attention brought both opportunities and challenges, but also something Isadora hadn't anticipated. Genuine accomplishment that went beyond political maneuvering. You've exceeded my expectations, Alaric said one evening as they reviewed reports of successful job placements. What began as managing a difficult situation has become something genuinely significant. The project succeeded because we both contributed what it needed rather than either of us working alone. It was an acknowledgement of their collaboration's value, but also recognition that their marriage had evolved into something more functional than either had originally anticipated. They had become genuine partners, even if neither was quite ready to examine all the implications of that development. Winter brought an unexpected crisis that would test both the school's foundations and the partnership Isadora and Alaric had built. The trouble arrived in the form of Mr. Geoffrey Blackwood, a visiting magistrate from the capital whose official inspection tour included evaluation of irregular educational establishments. Isadora first learned of the problem when Miss Evangeline sent an urgent message. She arrived at Westbrook Manor to find the headmistress visibly shaken, clutching a formal document bearing the magistrate's seal. He arrived this morning unannounced, Miss Evangeline explained, her usual composure strained. Asked detailed questions about our funding sources, curriculum, and the social backgrounds of our students. He seemed particularly interested in whether we're providing education above the student's natural station. Isadora reviewed the preliminary inspection report, recognizing the language of bureaucratic intimidation. Blackwood had found technical irregularities, permits that should have been filed, curriculum details requiring official approval, employment placements needing governmental monitoring. None were insurmountable, but they provided legal justification for shutting down the school if someone wished to make an example of unauthorized innovation. She returned to the castle immediately, finding Alaric in his study reviewing correspondence with focused intensity. "We have a problem," she said without preamble, placing Blackwood's report on his desk. Alaric read quickly, his expression darkening. Geoffrey Blackwood. Appointed 18 months ago by Lord Chancellor Pemberton. Ambitious, but known for rigid interpretation of regulations. Lord Chancellor Pemberton, Isadora repeated. Related to Lady Pemberton? Her brother-in-law. Someone who has consistently opposed policies that might strengthen regional autonomy at the expense of central authority. The connection clarified much. Their school's success had attracted attention from people who saw it as dangerous independence. A duke implementing innovative programs without seeking permission from appropriate governmental departments. So this inspection serves multiple purposes, Isadora concluded. It demonstrates that local initiatives require central oversight, while potentially embarrassing us for exceeding our authority. Exactly. Blackwood shuts down our school for regulatory violations, Pemberton establishes precedent for controlling similar innovations, and I appear to act without proper consideration of legal requirements. The political calculus was frustratingly clear. Their success had made them a target, and their enemies had found a legitimate avenue for undermining their work. What are our options? Alaric leaned back, fingers drumming in the pattern she recognized as intensive problem-solving. We can fight the inspection on technical grounds, but that requires proving compliance with regulations that may lack clear precedents. We can seek political intervention from allies who outrank Pemberton, but that makes the school appear dependent on favoritism rather than merit. Or, we transform the crisis into opportunity by proposing formal governmental recognition of the school as a model program worthy of official support. Isadora saw the logic immediately. Instead of defending against attack, they would advance into broader influence. You want to make our school a governmental initiative. I want to make our school so obviously beneficial that shutting it down would be politically expensive for anyone involved. If we can demonstrate its value to the right people in the capital, Blackwood's inspection becomes endorsement rather than condemnation. The strategy was characteristically bold but carried significant risks. Success would establish them as leaders in educational innovation. Failure would confirm their critics' assessment that they acted without adequate judgment. What would that require? A presentation in the capital that demonstrates our results to people whose opinions matter more than Pemberton's. Documented evidence of student success, employer satisfaction, and social benefits. Most importantly, a comprehensive plan for expanding the model to other regions under proper governmental oversight. We'd need to travel to the capital, arrange meetings with influential officials, and essentially convince the government to adopt our independent project as official policy. Within the next month, before Blackwood completes his inspection and issues binding recommendations. The timeline was challenging but not impossible. More concerning was the personal dimension. Extended travel together would require them to function as genuine partners in high-stakes political negotiations where any discord would be immediately obvious to experienced observers. Can we present convincingly as unified leadership? She asked carefully. Alaric met her gaze directly. I believe we can. The question is whether you're prepared for that level of collaboration. The word carried implications beyond professional partnership. Operating effectively in the capital's political environment would require them to demonstrate complete mutual confidence and seamless coordination. Any suggestion that their marriage was merely functional would undermine their credibility as innovative leaders worthy of governmental support. I'm prepared, she replied without hesitation. The school matters too much to let bureaucratic intimidation destroy it. Then we leave for the capital next week. I'll send word ahead to arrange the necessary meetings. That evening, as they planned their strategy over dinner, Isadora found herself anticipating the challenges ahead with excitement rather than anxiety. The work they had built together mattered enough to fight for, and fighting for it would require them to function at a level of partnership neither had originally envisioned. There's one more consideration, Alaric said as they concluded their planning. Success in the capital requires us to appear as equal partners rather than duke and subordinate duchess. You'll need to be prepared to represent your own expertise rather than simply supporting mine. The observation carried both opportunity and challenge. She would be representing herself as an innovator worthy of respect rather than simply the Duke of Ravenshire's accomplished wife. I understand, she replied. And I'm ready. Looking at his expression, she believed he was beginning to understand that readiness as well. Their partnership was about to face its most significant test, but it was also about to discover its full potential. The journey to the capital would change everything one way or another. The journey to the capital took 3 days by carriage, and Isadora quickly discovered that extended travel with Alaric revealed aspects of his character that their careful domestic routines had kept hidden. Away from the formal expectations of castle life, he proved to be an engaging traveling companion with an unexpected talent for observing the subtle details that made each village they passed through unique. "Notice the quality of the road maintenance," he commented as they entered a prosperous-looking market town on their second day. "Consistent stone work, proper drainage channels, recent repairs. The local magistrate here actually understands infrastructure investment. Unlike the previous district, where the roads were adequate but uninspired, and the public buildings showed deferred maintenance despite obvious local wealth. Classic signs of leadership that prioritizes immediate comfort over long-term planning." Isadora found herself genuinely interested in his analysis. "You evaluate regional governance by observing public works?" "Among other indicators. Road quality, market organization, the condition of public buildings, even the way in staff interact with travelers, all reflect local leadership priorities and competence." She began applying his methods to her own observations, noting details she had previously overlooked. By the time they reached the capital's outskirts, she felt she better understood both the broader political landscape and Alaric's approach to navigating it. The capital itself was overwhelming in its scale and complexity. Isadora had visited twice before, but always briefly and with limited opportunity to appreciate the intricate social dynamics that governed its daily operations. Now, preparing for meetings that would determine their school's future, she found herself studying the city with intense focus. Their lodgings at the prestigious Merchants Club provided both comfort and strategic advantage, close enough to governmental offices for convenient meetings, but independent enough to avoid appearing to seek favors through personal connections. "Lord Chancellor Pemberton has agreed to meet with us tomorrow afternoon," Alaric announced, reviewing the responses to his carefully crafted appointment requests. "The Secretary of Educational Affairs will see us the following morning. Most importantly, Lady Catherine Worthington has arranged a private dinner where we can present our case to several influential MPs without the formality of official proceedings." "Lady Worthington?" Isadora didn't recognize the name. "The Secretary's sister, and someone whose salons are known for facilitating productive political discussions. Her support would be invaluable, but her opposition could destroy our credibility before we've properly begun." The stakes were becoming clear. Their success depended not just on the quality of their arguments, but on their ability to navigate complex social relationships where personal impressions mattered as much as policy details. That evening they reviewed their presentation materials one final time, spreading documents across their suite sitting room table in a kind of intensive preparation that had become familiar from their collaborative work at home. "The employment placement records are our strongest evidence," Isadora observed, studying the detailed reports Miss Evangeline had compiled. 17 graduates employed within 2 months of completion, with employers requesting additional students for similar positions. Combined with the cost analysis showing sustainability within 2 years, and the curriculum design that emphasizes practical skills rather than impractical aspirations, Alaric agreed. "The question is whether we can present this information persuasively enough to convince skeptical officials that expansion serves their interests." "What specific concerns do you anticipate?" "That educated lower-class women will develop unrealistic expectations about their social position. That increased education will make them less willing to accept traditional employment arrangements. That the program represents dangerous social innovation disguised as charitable activity. All legitimate worries from the perspective of people who benefited from existing social structures. Their challenge was demonstrating that their program strengthened those structures rather than undermining them. Then we emphasize that our graduates are more effective employees, not more rebellious ones," Isadora concluded. "Better trained, more reliable, capable of handling complex responsibilities that make their employers' lives easier rather than more difficult." "Exactly. We're improving the quality of domestic service, not challenging its fundamental nature." The approach required delicate balance, progressive enough to seem innovative, conservative enough to avoid threatening established interests. As they worked through potential questions and optimal responses, Isadora realized that their collaboration had evolved into something remarkably sophisticated. They anticipated each other's thoughts, built seamlessly on each other's suggestions, and identified weaknesses in their arguments with the kind of constructive criticism that strengthened rather than undermined their joint position. Working together had become not just functional but genuinely productive. "There's one more consideration," Alaric said as they concluded their preparation. "Tomorrow's meetings will be our first public test as collaborative partners rather than duke and dutiful wife. How we interact with each other will be observed and evaluated as carefully as what we say about the school." The observation carried weight. Government officials were expert at reading relationship dynamics, and any suggestion that their marriage was purely political would undermine their credibility as innovative leaders worth supporting. "What do you suggest?" "That we function exactly as we have been, as partners who respect each other's expertise and work together effectively toward shared objectives. The authenticity of our collaboration is actually our greatest strength." Isadora considered this assessment, realizing that somewhere over the past months their careful performance of marital partnership had evolved into something more genuine. They had learned to trust each other's judgment, appreciate each other's contributions, and work together with the kind of mutual confidence that couldn't be easily faked. "I think you're right," she replied. "We have become genuine partners, haven't we?" "Yes," he said simply. "And tomorrow we discover whether that partnership can survive intense political scrutiny. The answer would determine not just their school's future, but the future of whatever their marriage was becoming." As Isadora prepared for sleep, she found herself anticipating the challenges ahead with confidence rather than anxiety. They had built something worth defending, both in their educational initiative and in their unexpected partnership. Tomorrow would test whether both were strong enough to withstand examination by people whose expertise included identifying weakness and exploiting it. Either way, they would face the test together. The meeting with Lord Chancellor Pemberton took place in his imposing office overlooking the capital's governmental district. Isadora had expected intimidation tactics, but Pemberton proved more subtle, greeting them with careful courtesy while making clear through seating arrangements that this was an evaluation rather than collaboration. "Your Grace," he said to Alaric after initial pleasantries, "I understand you've established an educational institution without seeking proper governmental oversight." "We've established a school that serves regional needs while maintaining full compliance with applicable regulations," Alaric replied smoothly. "The question of additional oversight is precisely why we've requested this meeting." Pemberton's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're seeking oversight rather than avoiding it?" "We're seeking to transform a successful local initiative into a model program worthy of broader implementation," Isadora interjected, placing their carefully prepared documentation on his desk. "Our results demonstrate benefits that extend far beyond our immediate region." The intervention was calculated. Rather than allowing Pemberton to frame the discussion as regulatory compliance, she had shifted focus to program expansion and governmental opportunity. Pemberton reviewed their materials with thoroughness of someone accustomed to finding problems in apparently sound proposals. "Impressive employment statistics," he conceded after several minutes. "Though I notice your graduates are primarily placed in domestic service positions. Hardly revolutionary educational outcomes." "Revolutionary outcomes weren't our objective," Alaric replied. "Practical improvement was. Our graduates perform domestic service more effectively, with greater reliability, and with skills that make them valuable to employers seeking competent staff." "And employers are satisfied with these enhanced capabilities?" Isadora produced letters from families who had hired their graduates. Lady Pemberton might be particularly interested in Mrs. Thompson's assessment. "I believe Lady Pemberton was previously acquainted with Mrs. Thompson through the Charitable Ladies Association." The reference was carefully chosen. Mrs. Thompson was known for exacting standards, and her enthusiastic endorsement would carry weight with someone who understood her reputation. Pemberton read Mrs. Thompson's letter with increasing attention. She credits the young woman's training with enabling her to manage complex social arrangements that previous companions found overwhelming. "Because our curriculum emphasizes practical problem-solving rather than mere obedience," Isadora explained. "Students learn to anticipate needs, coordinate multiple responsibilities, and handle unexpected situations with competence rather than confusion." "Interesting." Pemberton focused directly on them both. "Assuming your results are as impressive as these documents suggest, what exactly are you proposing?" Alaric leaned forward, recognizing the opening they had hoped for. "We propose establishing the Morrison School model as a governmental program suitable for implementation across multiple regions. Initial funding would support 3 additional schools, with expansion based on documented success. Under proper governmental oversight, naturally," Isadora added. "With standardized curriculum, regulated instructor qualifications, and systematic evaluation of outcomes. Pemberton reviewed their proposal with detailed attention that suggested genuine consideration rather than polite dismissal. The financial projections assumed governmental investment would be recovered through reduced unemployment and improved service quality, he said finally. Ambitious assumptions. Based on documented results from our existing program, Alaric replied. We can provide detailed analysis of economic impact, including reduced relief payments to unemployed young women and increased tax revenue from families who can afford better trained staff. And the social implications? Educated women developing expectations above their proper station? Our graduates understand their station perfectly well, Isadora said firmly. They simply fill it more competently than previous generations. Education that enables someone to serve effectively isn't education that encourages rebellion against service. Pemberton nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with her response. Very well. I'll review your proposal thoroughly and provide a recommendation to the appropriate ministries. If your documented results prove accurate, this might indeed represent valuable policy innovation. The meeting concluded with expressions of mutual respect that felt genuine rather than merely diplomatic. As they departed, Isadora felt cautiously optimistic, but Alaric's expression suggested more complex assessment. He's genuinely interested, she said once they were safely away from governmental offices. He's interested, but he's also calculating political advantages, Alaric replied. Supporting our program positions him as someone who recognizes innovative policy. But he'll only commit if he's confident the political benefits outweigh potential risks. Which means? Our dinner with Lady Worthington becomes crucial. If influential MPs express support, Pemberton gains cover for endorsing our proposal. If they express concerns, he can distance himself from potential controversy. That evening's dinner would be an entirely different kind of challenge, one requiring them to navigate complex social dynamics while demonstrating the strength of their partnership under intense scrutiny. As they prepared for this final test, Isadora realized that whatever their marriage had become, it had evolved far beyond either's original expectations. Tomorrow would determine whether their collaboration was strong enough to transform their local success into something with national significance. Their school's future, and their partnerships, hung in the balance. Lady Worthington's salon proved to be an entirely different kind of challenge. Her elegant townhouse drew people who influenced policy through social connections rather than official positions. MPs' wives, senior civil servants, influential merchants, and intellectual figures whose opinions shaped educated public discourse. The dinner itself was a masterpiece of strategic arrangement, with guests seated to encourage productive conversation while avoiding potentially explosive combinations of conflicting viewpoints. Isadora found herself positioned between Mrs. Harriet Blackwood, no relation to the troublesome magistrate, and Mr. James Whitmore, an MP known for progressive sympathies but careful political calculations. The conversation began with general topics before gradually focusing on questions of education and social improvement, with their school serving as a practical example rather than the central focus. Surely, observed Mrs. Blackwood as the main course was served, providing advanced education to working-class women creates expectations that society isn't prepared to accommodate. Our experience suggests the opposite, Isadora replied carefully. Education that enhances competence within established roles strengthens those roles rather than undermining them. Our graduates are more effective servants, not frustrated pseudo-intellectuals. But education inevitably broadens horizons, Mr. Whitmore pressed. Don't you risk creating dissatisfaction with traditional employment? We risk creating dissatisfaction with incompetent employment, Alaric interjected smoothly from across the table. Our graduates find satisfaction in performing their duties excellently rather than merely adequately. Excellence provides its own rewards, regardless of social position. Lady Worthington nodded approvingly. An interesting distinction. Excellence within established frameworks rather than rebellion against them. Precisely, Isadora agreed. We're not challenging social structures. We're improving the quality of work performed within those structures. A well-trained companion can manage complex social arrangements that overwhelm someone with inadequate preparation. And employers appreciate these enhanced capabilities? Asked Colonel Pemberton, the Lord Chancellor's nephew, who had been quietly observing the discussion. Alaric produced a brief selection of employer testimonials they had brought for exactly this purpose. Lady Hertford describes her new companion as the most competent assistant she has ever employed. Mrs. Thompson credits our graduate with enabling her to manage social obligations that previously required constant personal supervision. Fascinating, murmured Lord Ashworth, a senior MP whose opinion carried considerable weight. You've essentially professionalized domestic service. We've enhanced the training that domestic service has always required, Isadora corrected gently. The difference is systematic preparation rather than learning through trial and error. The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with various guests challenging different aspects of their program while others defended its apparent benefits. Mrs. Blackwood worried about social disruption. Mr. Whitmore questioned whether their approach was sufficiently progressive. Colonel Pemberton wanted details about cost-effectiveness and scalability. Throughout the complex discussion, Isadora noticed how naturally she and Alaric had begun working together to address concerns and build support. Their responses complemented each other seamlessly, with each building on the other's contributions to create more persuasive arguments than either could have developed alone. When Lady Worthington steered conversation toward broader questions of regional development, they seamlessly shifted their examples to demonstrate how educational improvements could strengthen local economies without threatening established interests. Economic stability benefits from competent workers at every level, Alaric observed. Our program simply ensures that one level, domestic service, functions more effectively. With spillover benefits for families who employ our graduates, Isadora added. Better trained staff enable employers to focus on their own responsibilities rather than constantly managing household problems. By evening's end, the mood had shifted from skeptical questioning to genuine interest in potential expansion. Several guests requested additional information about curriculum details and implementation costs. Impressively handled, Lady Worthington said privately as the gathering dispersed. You've clearly developed something more substantial than typical charitable enterprise. I'll mention this evening's discussion to my brother when next I see him. The endorsement was subtle but significant. Lady Worthington's influence operated through quiet recommendations rather than dramatic public statements, but those recommendations carried substantial weight with people whose support they needed. As they returned to their lodgings through the capital's quiet evening streets, Isadora reflected on how the entire evening had unfolded. We function well together in these situations, she observed. Better than I expected, Alaric agreed. Your ability to address concerns about women's education while reassuring people about social stability was particularly effective. And your emphasis on excellence rather than mere compliance reframed the entire discussion in ways that made our program seem conservative rather than radical. They had discovered something important about their partnership. It worked not just in private collaboration, but under intense public scrutiny from sophisticated observers. Whatever their marriage had become, it could withstand examination by people whose expertise included identifying authentic relationships and distinguishing them from mere political arrangements. Tomorrow's meeting with the secretary should be more straightforward, Alaric said as they reached their lodgings. Tonight demonstrated that influential people see value in our approach. More than that, Isadora replied, realizing the full significance of the evening's success. Tonight demonstrated that we can represent our work convincingly to anyone who matters. The observation carried implications beyond their immediate political objectives. They had become genuine partners in more ways than either had originally anticipated, and that partnership was proving stronger and more effective than she had dared hope. Tomorrow would bring their final test, but tonight had already proven that whatever challenges awaited them, they could face them together with confidence. The Secretary of Educational Affairs received them in his spacious office the following morning with the brisk efficiency of someone whose schedule allowed little time for extended pleasantries. Sir Reginald Thornfield had built his reputation on practical assessment rather than political maneuvering, which made him potentially more receptive to their evidence-based arguments. Lord and Lady Ravenshire, he said, gesturing toward chairs arranged before his imposing desk. Lady Worthington mentioned your educational initiative with considerable enthusiasm. I confess myself curious about a program that has generated such positive commentary. Isadora exchanged a brief glance with Alaric, recognizing the opportunity Lady Worthington's endorsement had created. Rather than beginning defensively, they could present their work as something already recognized for its value. The Morrison School represents our attempt to address practical workforce needs through systematic educational improvement, Alaric began, placing their comprehensive documentation before Sir Reginald. We've focused on measurable outcomes rather than theoretical objectives. Sir Reginald examined their materials with the methodical attention of someone accustomed to evaluating program effectiveness. His questions were precise and practical. graduation rates, employment statistics, employer satisfaction, financial sustainability, and potential for replication. 93% employment within 2 months, he noted, reviewing their placement records. Impressive, assuming these figures are accurate. Verified by independent confirmation from employing families, Isadora replied, producing the supporting documentation they had carefully assembled. We can provide contact information for any employer whose assessment you wish to verify personally. And the curriculum design emphasizes practical skills rather than academic subjects? Practical skills informed by academic foundation, she clarified. Students learn arithmetic because managing household accounts requires mathematical competence. They study literature because effective correspondence requires understanding of proper expression and tone. Sir Reginald nodded approvingly. Academic skills applied to practical purposes rather than academic study for its own sake. Exactly. Every subject in our curriculum serves specific employment requirements that students will encounter in their positions. The secretary continued his examination for nearly 30 minutes, asking detailed questions about instructor qualifications, student selection criteria, and the economic model that made their program sustainable. His thoroughness suggested genuine interest rather than mere politeness. Your financial projections assume governmental investment would be recovered within 3 years through reduced unemployment relief and increased tax revenue, he said finally. Optimistic, but not unreasonable if your employment statistics prove replicable. Conservative actually, Alaric replied. Our calculations assume lower placement rates and longer recovery periods than our current experience suggests. We prefer to exceed expectations rather than promise unrealistic outcomes. Sir Reginald set aside their documents and focused directly on both of them. Assuming I recommend governmental support for program expansion, what specific implementation would you propose? The question indicated they had successfully moved beyond evaluation to practical planning. Isadora felt a surge of carefully controlled excitement as Alaric outlined their expansion proposal. Initial support for 3 additional schools in different regions, each adapted to local employment needs but following standardized curriculum principles. Central oversight to ensure quality consistency, with systematic evaluation of outcomes to guide further expansion. Regional adaptation is crucial, Isadora added. Rural areas require different emphases than manufacturing centers or commercial districts. Our model provides framework rather than rigid prescription. Sensible approach, Sir Reginald agreed. Regional implementation under central standards prevents both excessive variation and inappropriate uniformity. They spent another hour discussing implementation details, funding mechanisms, and evaluation procedures. By the meeting's conclusion, Sir Reginald had essentially committed to supporting their proposal, pending formal review by his department and final approval by relevant ministries. I'll prepare a recommendation for ministerial consideration, he said as they prepared to depart. Based on this morning's discussion, I expect favorable reception. Your documentation is thorough, your results are impressive, and your approach demonstrates the kind of practical innovation our educational policies need. The endorsement exceeded their most optimistic expectations. As they left the governmental building, Isadora felt genuine triumph tempered by awareness that formal approval would require additional bureaucratic processes that could take months to complete. We've succeeded beyond what I thought possible, she said as they walked toward their lodgings through the capital's busy afternoon streets. We've demonstrated that our partnership can accomplish significant objectives, Alaric replied. The school's success was always dependent on our ability to work together effectively. The observation carried weight beyond their immediate political victory. Over the past months, their careful arrangement had evolved into something approaching genuine partnership, tested under increasingly challenging circumstances and proven reliable. What happens now? She asked. We return home and continue developing our school while the governmental machinery processes our proposal. If approval comes through, we'll face the more complex challenge of scaling our approach across multiple regions. And if it doesn't? We continue operating independently, having demonstrated that our approach works regardless of official recognition. Either outcome represented success of different kinds, but Isadora found herself hoping for governmental endorsement not just for the school's benefit, but for what it would mean about their partnership's significance. That evening, their final night in the capital, they dined quietly at their lodgings and reviewed what they had accomplished during their intensive week of political negotiation. We've changed something important, Isadora said, reflecting on the progression from defensive crisis management to proactive policy advocacy. Not just the school's prospects, but our understanding of what we can achieve when we work together. Yes, Alaric agreed simply. We have. The acknowledgement carried implications neither was quite ready to examine completely, but both understood represented a fundamental shift in their relationship's nature and potential. Tomorrow they would begin the journey home, returning to familiar routines but carrying with them the knowledge that their partnership had proven capable of achieving objectives that neither could have accomplished alone. Whatever their marriage had become, it was no longer merely functional. It had become genuinely productive, and that productivity was beginning to transform more than just their educational initiatives. The future, like their partnership, held possibilities that were just beginning to emerge. The Secretary of Educational Affairs received them in his spacious office the following morning with the brisk efficiency of someone whose schedule allowed little time for extended pleasantries. Sir Reginald Thornfield had built his reputation on practical assessment rather than political maneuvering, which made him potentially more receptive to their evidence-based arguments. Lord and Lady Ravensshire, he said, gesturing toward chairs arranged before his imposing desk. Lady Worthington mentioned your educational initiative with considerable enthusiasm. I confess myself curious about a program that has generated such positive commentary. Isadora exchanged a brief glance with Alaric, recognizing the opportunity Lady Worthington's endorsement had created. Rather than beginning defensively, they could present their work as something already recognized for its value. The Morrison School represents our attempt to address practical workforce needs through systematic educational improvement, Alaric began, placing their comprehensive documentation before Sir Reginald. We focused on measurable outcomes rather than theoretical objectives. Sir Reginald examined their materials with the methodical attention of someone accustomed to evaluating program effectiveness. His questions were precise and practical. Graduation rates, employment statistics, employer satisfaction, financial sustainability, and potential for replication. 93% employment within 2 months, he noted, reviewing their placement records. Impressive, assuming these figures are accurate. Verified by independent confirmation from employing families, Isadora replied, producing the supporting documentation they had carefully assembled. We can provide contact information for any employer whose assessment you wish to verify personally. And the curriculum design emphasizes practical skills rather than academic subjects? Practical skills informed by academic foundation, she clarified. Students learn arithmetic because managing household accounts requires mathematical competence. They study literature because effective correspondence requires understanding of proper expression and tone. Sir Reginald nodded approvingly. Academic skills applied to practical purposes rather than academic study for its own sake. Exactly. Every subject in our curriculum serves specific employment requirements that students will encounter in their positions. The secretary continued his examination for nearly 30 minutes, asking detailed questions about instructor qualifications, student selection criteria, and the economic model that made their program sustainable. His thoroughness suggested genuine interest rather than mere politeness. Your financial projections assume governmental investment would be recovered within 3 years through reduced unemployment relief and increased tax revenue, he said finally. Optimistic, but not unreasonable if your employment statistics prove replicable. Conservative actually, Alaric replied. Our calculations assume lower placement rates and longer recovery periods than our current experience suggests. We prefer to exceed expectations rather than promise unrealistic outcomes. Sir Reginald set aside their documents and focused directly on both of them. Assuming I recommend governmental support for program expansion, what specific implementation would you propose? The question indicated they had successfully moved beyond evaluation to practical planning. Isadora felt a surge of carefully controlled excitement as Alaric outlined their expansion proposal. Initial support for 3 additional schools in different regions, each adapted to local employment needs but following standardized curriculum principles. Central oversight to ensure quality consistency, with systematic evaluation of outcomes to guide further expansion. Regional adaptation is crucial, Isadora added. Rural areas require different emphases than manufacturing centers or commercial districts. Our model provides framework rather than rigid prescription. Sensible approach, Sir Reginald agreed. Regional implementation under central standards prevents both excessive variation and inappropriate uniformity. They spent another hour discussing implementation details, funding mechanisms, and evaluation procedures. By the meeting's conclusion, Sir Reginald had essentially committed to supporting their proposal, pending formal review by his department and final approval by relevant ministries. "I'll prepare a recommendation for ministerial consideration," he said as they prepared to depart. "Based on this morning's discussion, I expect favorable reception. Your documentation is thorough, your results are impressive, and your approach demonstrates the kind of practical innovation our educational policies need." The endorsement exceeded their most optimistic expectations. As they left the governmental building, Isadora felt genuine triumph tempered by awareness that formal approval would require additional bureaucratic processes that could take months to complete. "We've succeeded beyond what I thought possible," she said as they walked toward their lodgings through the capital's busy afternoon streets. "We've demonstrated that our partnership can accomplish significant objectives," Alaric replied. "The school's success was always dependent on our ability to work together effectively." The observation carried weight beyond their immediate political victory. Over the past months, their careful arrangement had evolved into something approaching genuine partnership, tested under increasingly challenging circumstances and proven reliable. "What happens now?" she asked. "We return home and continue developing our school while the governmental machinery processes our proposal. If approval comes through, we'll face the more complex challenge of scaling our approach across multiple regions. And if it doesn't? We continue operating independently, having demonstrated that our approach works regardless of official recognition." Either outcome represented success of different kinds, but Isadora found herself hoping for governmental endorsement not just for the school's benefit, but for what it would mean about their partnership's significance. That evening, their final night in the capital, they dined quietly at their lodgings and reviewed what they had accomplished during their intensive week of political negotiation. "We've changed something important," Isadora said, reflecting on the progression from defensive crisis management to proactive policy advocacy. "Not just the school's prospects, but our understanding of what we can achieve when we work together." "Yes," Alaric agreed simply. "We have." The acknowledgement carried implications neither was quite ready to examine completely, but both understood represented a fundamental shift in their relationship's nature and potential. Tomorrow they would begin the journey home, returning to familiar routines but carrying with them the knowledge that their partnership had proven capable of achieving objectives that neither could have accomplished alone. Whatever their marriage had become, it was no longer merely functional. It had become genuinely productive, and that productivity was beginning to transform more than just their educational initiatives. The future, like their partnership, held possibilities that were just beginning to emerge. The journey home felt different from their outward trip, marked by a comfortable familiarity that spoke to how their partnership had evolved. Alaric proved an even more engaging traveling companion when celebrating success rather than managing anxiety, sharing observations about regional politics and local governance with the relaxed confidence of someone whose recent efforts had achieved their objectives. "Notice how the in-service has improved since our outward journey," he commented as they stopped for their second night's rest. "Word travels quickly along coaching routes. The capital's opinion of our school is already influencing how we're received. Political success creates its own momentum," Isadora observed, noting the innkeeper's particular attention to their comfort and the quality of service that exceeded what she remembered from their previous stay. "Exactly. Today's endorsements become tomorrow's assumptions about our competence and significance." She found herself appreciating not just his political insight, but the way he shared it with genuine pleasure in her understanding rather than merely demonstrating his expertise. Their conversations had acquired the easy flow of genuine intellectual companionship. By the time they reached Ravenshire's familiar boundaries, Isadora felt they were returning not just to their established duties, but to a transformed understanding of their shared capabilities and future potential. The school welcomed them with visible excitement. Miss Evangeline met their carriage with obvious relief and barely contained curiosity about their reception in the capital. "Your Grace, your Ladyship," she said, curtsying quickly before her eagerness overcame formal protocol. "Please tell me the governmental officials appreciated our work." "They did indeed," Isadora replied with genuine satisfaction. "The Secretary of Educational Affairs will recommend official support for expanding our model to additional regions." Miss Evangeline's face brightened with the kind of joy that made all their political maneuvering worthwhile. "The students will be so pleased. They've been concerned that external criticism might force us to close despite our success." "External criticism has instead become official endorsement," Alaric said warmly. "Your excellent management provided the foundation that made our political success possible." As they toured the school, observing classes in session and reviewing student progress during their absence, Isadora felt profound satisfaction with what they had built together. The quiet efficiency of daily operations, the obvious engagement of students with their studies, and the confidence Miss Evangeline displayed in managing complex administrative responsibilities all demonstrated that their initiative had achieved genuine institutional stability. Enrollment requests for next term have increased substantially, Miss Evangeline reported as they reviewed recent correspondence. Families from neighboring districts are seeking placement for their daughters, and several employers have specifically requested graduates for important positions. Success generating additional success, Alaric noted with approval. Exactly what sustainable innovation requires. That evening, as they settled back into their domestic routines, Isadora found herself reflecting on how their week in the capital had affected not just their external relationships, but their understanding of each other and their marriage's evolving nature. "We accomplished something significant," she said as they shared a quiet dinner in their private dining room, away from the formal expectations of public meals. "More significant than either of us anticipated when we first discussed the school," Alaric agreed. "What began as managing a difficult situation has become genuine policy innovation with national implications. But more than that," she continued carefully, "we discovered that our partnership works under intense scrutiny from sophisticated observers. Whatever our marriage has become, it's strong enough to withstand examination by people whose expertise includes identifying authentic relationships." Alaric was quiet for several moments, considering her observation with the thoughtfulness she had learned to appreciate. "You're right. We've moved beyond performing the roles of collaborative partners to actually being collaborative partners. The distinction mattered. Performance could be maintained temporarily under specific circumstances, but genuine partnership had to function consistently across varying situations and unexpected challenges. Which raises questions about what we want our partnership to become," she said, voicing the consideration that had been developing throughout their journey home. "What kind of questions?" "Whether we want to continue developing this collaboration, explore its potential, or maintain it at its current functional level." The conversation was venturing into territory neither had directly addressed before, the possibility that their arranged marriage might evolve into something approaching genuine affection and mutual commitment rather than merely effective cooperation. "I find myself preferring collaboration to independence," Alaric said after careful consideration. "Our joint accomplishments exceed what either of us could achieve separately. But more than that, I enjoy working with you. Your intelligence, your practical judgment, your ability to see solutions I might miss." Isadora felt a flutter of something warmer than mere satisfaction at his assessment. "I feel the same. You challenge me intellectually while respecting my opinions. You trust my judgment while offering perspectives that improve my thinking. Then perhaps we should explore what deeper partnership might involve." The suggestion was made quietly, without dramatic declaration or romantic flourishes, but with the kind of serious consideration that made it more meaningful than elaborate protestations might have been. "I'd like that," she replied with equal simplicity. They were approaching the possibility of genuine affection founded on demonstrated compatibility and shared accomplishments rather than arranged convenience or passionate infatuation. The foundation they had built through months of careful collaboration was proving strong enough to support something more personal and emotionally significant. "There's no urgency," Alaric said, understanding her need to consider the implications carefully. "We can develop this at whatever pace feels comfortable." "Thank you. That matters more than you might realize." As the evening progressed toward sleep, Isadora found herself contemplating a future that held possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider. Their partnership had proven its effectiveness under challenging circumstances, their mutual respect had deepened into genuine appreciation, and their collaboration had become something she actively enjoyed rather than merely tolerated. Perhaps arranged marriages could occasionally evolve into something approaching the affectionate partnerships she had once envied in other couples. Perhaps their careful beginning was creating space for something more emotionally fulfilling to develop naturally. Tomorrow would bring the familiar rhythms of managing their school, their estate, and their various responsibilities. But tonight, the future held possibilities that felt genuinely exciting rather than merely manageable. Their partnership was becoming something neither had originally envisioned, and that transformation was just beginning. Spring brought the official response they had been awaiting, delivered in an envelope bearing the governmental seal and accompanied by a letter that would fundamentally change their school's future. Sir Reginald's recommendation had been accepted, and the Morrison School model would receive governmental funding for expansion to 3 additional regions. More significantly, Alaric and Isadora had been appointed joint directors of the new Educational Innovation Initiative, making them responsible for overseeing implementation while maintaining operational independence that preserved their original vision. Joint directors, Isadora repeated as they reviewed the formal appointment documents in Alaric's study. "They're recognizing our collaboration as genuine partnership rather than treating me as your assistant." "Because our collaboration genuinely is partnership," Alaric replied. "Sir Reginald understood that our school's success resulted from both our contributions, not just ducal authority implementing charitable initiatives. The recognition carried implications beyond professional acknowledgement. Their marriage had evolved to the point where external observers saw them as equals working toward shared objectives rather than aristocratic husband with competent wife providing support. The expansion timeline was ambitious but manageable. 3 new schools would open within 18 months. 1 in the industrial Midlands, 1 in a rural agricultural region, and 1 in a coastal commercial center. Each would adapt the Morrison curriculum to local employment needs while maintaining standardized quality expectations. "We'll need to travel extensively for site selection and staff recruitment," Alaric noted, studying the implementation schedule. "Months away from Raven's hire overseeing development. Together?" The question carried implications about how their evolving personal relationship would function under the practical demands of professional travel. "The appointment specifically designates us as collaborative directors. Effective oversight requires both our perspectives." Isadora felt a complicated mixture of excitement and apprehension about extended travel with Alaric in their new capacity as recognized professional partners. Their relationship had been developing in the comfortable privacy of their established routines. Intensive travel would test whether their growing emotional connection could flourish under different circumstances. "I'd like that," she said, realizing the truth of her response. "Working together on something this significant." The conversation was interrupted by Miss Evangeline's arrival with news that would complicate their planning. Mr. Geoffrey Blackwood had returned for a follow-up inspection, apparently unaware that his original concerns had resulted in governmental endorsement rather than closure orders. "He seems confused by our enhanced official status," Miss Evangeline reported with barely suppressed amusement. "Asked several questions about whether we've received proper authorization for our expanded operations." "Has anyone informed him about our governmental appointment?" Alaric inquired. "I thought you might prefer to handle that conversation personally, Your Grace." The diplomatic response suggested Miss Evangeline understood that Blackwood's awkward position required careful management to avoid unnecessary embarrassment while establishing clear boundaries for future interactions. They found Blackwood in the school's main classroom, observing an arithmetic lesson with the kind of intense scrutiny that suggested he was still searching for regulatory violations. His expression when they entered was notably less confident than during his original inspection. "Mr. Blackwood," Isadora said pleasantly. "How good of you to return for our progress review." "Your Ladyship." "Your Grace." He straightened uncomfortably. "I was conducting a follow-up evaluation of compliance with previous recommendations." "Excellent timing," Alaric replied, producing their governmental appointment documents. "We've recently received official recognition that should address any remaining regulatory concerns." Blackwood's face went through several expressions as he read the formal designation of their school as a model program worthy of expansion and their appointment as governmental directors for educational innovation. The documents made clear that their work now carried official endorsement at the highest administrative levels. "I was not informed of these developments," he said finally. "Understandable," Isadora replied diplomatically. "Governmental communications often require time to reach all relevant offices. Perhaps you'd like to observe our current operations and provide feedback that might benefit our expansion planning?" The suggestion transformed Blackwood from inspector to consultant, allowing him to maintain dignity while acknowledging their changed status. His relief was visible as he accepted the face-saving opportunity she had offered. They spent the remainder of the morning giving Blackwood a comprehensive tour that demonstrated both their program's effectiveness and their proper compliance with all applicable regulations. His questions shifted from seeking problems to understanding methods that might prove useful for similar initiatives. "Quite impressive," he admitted as they concluded the visit. "Your systematic approach to practical education appears to produce excellent results." "We're pleased that governmental review confirmed our effectiveness," Alaric said graciously. "Your original inspection helped us document our procedures more thoroughly." The exchange ended with mutual expressions of respect that felt genuine rather than merely diplomatic. Blackwood departed with clear understanding that any future regulatory concerns should be addressed through proper governmental channels rather than independent investigation. "Handled very well," Miss Evangeline observed once Blackwood had gone. "You transformed potential controversy into productive consultation." Practice in managing difficult conversations, Isadora replied, thinking of their recent capital negotiations. We've learned to work together under pressure. As they spent the afternoon reviewing expansion plans and discussing implementation strategies, Isadora reflected on how naturally their collaboration had evolved to address whatever challenges emerged. The partnership that had begun as careful performance had become genuine mutual reliance that strengthened under external pressure rather than weakening. Are you ready for the demands this expansion will place on us? Alaric asked as evening approached. I'm ready for whatever we undertake together, she replied, surprising herself with the honesty of her response. The conversation carried implications about their relationship's development that neither was quite ready to examine completely, but both understood represented fundamental changes in their marriage's nature and emotional significance. Their partnership was no longer simply functional or even merely productive. It was becoming personally fulfilling in ways that suggested possibilities neither had originally dared consider. Tomorrow would bring the detailed planning their expansion required, but tonight represented a quiet recognition that their careful beginning had created space for something genuinely satisfying to develop. Whatever their future held, they would face it as true partners in every sense that mattered. Summer brought their first major test of managing the expansion while navigating their evolving relationship. The site selection for the Midland School required 2 weeks of intensive travel, staying at various inns while evaluating potential locations and interviewing candidates for administrative positions. Away from the familiar rhythms of Ravensshire, their partnership took on different dimensions. Shared meals became extended conversations about educational philosophy and regional economics. Evening hours, previously dedicated to separate pursuits, became collaborative planning sessions that gradually included more personal topics. The Manchester location offers better transportation connections, Alaric observed as they reviewed their notes over dinner at the Merchant's Inn, but the Birmingham site provides access to a larger population of potential students. More importantly, Birmingham's industrial development creates demand for the kind of enhanced domestic service our graduates provide, Isadora replied, spreading their demographic analysis across the table. Prosperous manufacturers need competent household staff. Then Birmingham it is. He smiled at the ease with which they had reached consensus. Your practical judgment consistently outweighs my theoretical considerations. Your theoretical framework gives my practical instincts proper foundation, she countered. We balance each other effectively. The observation carried implications beyond their professional collaboration, and both recognized the subtle shift toward more personal acknowledgement of their compatibility. That evening, as they finalized their Birmingham decision, their conversation drifted toward topics they had rarely discussed directly: their individual backgrounds, their expectations when entering marriage, and their surprise at discovering genuine intellectual companionship. I expected respectful cooperation, Isadora admitted. I didn't expect to enjoy our collaboration as much as I do. I expected dutiful partnership, Alaric replied quietly. I didn't expect to find myself looking forward to your company. The exchange was made without dramatic declaration, but with the kind of honest reflection that marked their relationship's gradual development toward deeper emotional connection. Their return to Ravensshire brought welcome news about the original school's continued success. Miss Evangeline reported increased enrollment requests, enthusiastic employer feedback about recent graduates, and the first inquiries from other regions seeking advice about establishing similar programs independently. Our influence is spreading beyond official governmental expansion, she noted with satisfaction. The model's effectiveness is generating organic replication. Natural growth is often more sustainable than imposed development, Alaric observed, reviewing the correspondence from distant educators seeking guidance. Success that inspires voluntary adoption rather than requiring mandated implementation. The observation applied to more than educational policy. Their marriage's evolution toward genuine partnership had occurred through natural development rather than forced progression, creating a foundation that felt more authentic and durable than arranged convenience could have provided. As autumn approached, bringing the opening timeline for their first expansion school, they faced the reality that their joint directorship would require extended periods away from home. The prospect generated both excitement about their shared professional objectives and questions about how intensive collaboration would affect their personal relationships' continued development. Are you concerned about the demands expansion will place on our partnership? Isadora asked one evening as they walked through their estate's gardens, using the term partnership in a way that encompassed both professional and personal dimensions. I'm concerned about managing the complexity, Alaric replied thoughtfully. Professional responsibilities, personal development, and public expectations all operating simultaneously. But not concerned about our ability to handle that complexity together? No. If anything, our collaboration seems to strengthen under pressure rather than weakening. The assessment proved accurate as they prepared for the Birmingham school's launch. The intensive coordination required for staff training, curriculum adaptation, and community integration drew them into closer working relationship while also creating opportunities for personal conversations about their shared objectives and individual hopes for their future. I find myself wanting this expansion to succeed not just for policy reasons, Isadora confided as they reviewed final preparations, but because it represents what we've built together. Our first major joint accomplishment beyond managing existing obligations, Alaric agreed. Something we created rather than inherited. The distinction mattered. Their marriage had begun with inherited expectations and arranged objectives, but their expansion initiative represented genuine choice to pursue shared goals that reflected their combined vision and collaborative capabilities. The Birmingham school's opening exceeded their expectations, with strong community support, qualified student enrollment, and competent staff management that suggested their model would adapt successfully to different regional contexts. More importantly, the week they spent overseeing the launch confirmed that their partnership functioned effectively under new and demanding circumstances. Their collaboration remained productive while their personal relationship continued developing naturally without artificial pressure or forced intimacy. We work well together, Isadora observed on their journey home, reflecting on how smoothly they had managed the complex logistics of establishing a new institution while maintaining their own relationship stability. Better than well, Alaric replied. We complement each other in ways that make our joint efforts more effective than our individual capabilities would suggest. In professional collaboration and personal compatibility, she added, acknowledging the reality that their marriage had evolved into something approaching the kind of genuine partnership she had once thought impossible within arranged relationships. Yes. Both aspects seemed to strengthen simultaneously. As their carriage approached Ravenshire's familiar boundaries, Isadora felt profound satisfaction with what they had accomplished and genuine excitement about their future possibilities. Their careful beginning had created space for something emotionally fulfilling to develop, and that development was proving more satisfying than she had dared hope. Their partnership had become something neither had originally envisioned, and its continued evolution held promise of genuine happiness founded on mutual respect, shared accomplishments, and growing affection that felt authentic rather than obligatory. Whatever challenges their expansion would bring, they would face them as true partners in every sense that mattered. Winter's arrival brought unexpected challenges that would test their partnership more thoroughly than governmental negotiations or school expansion. A severe storm damaged several estate buildings, requiring immediate attention and complex coordination between repairs, tenant welfare, and maintaining their educational commitments. The crisis revealed new dimensions of their collaboration as they worked 18-hour days managing emergency responses while ensuring their schools continued operating effectively. Isadora found herself coordinating with local craftsmen and suppliers while Alaric handled tenant relocations and insurance negotiations, their individual strengths naturally complementing urgent practical needs. The Miller's family needs temporary housing until their cottage roof is repaired, she reported during one of their brief evening consultations, too exhausted for formal dinner but needing to coordinate the next day's priorities. The Thornton barn can accommodate them comfortably, Alaric replied, reviewing his notes about available spaces. Mrs. Thornton specifically offered when I explained the situation. And the school roof? Repairs begin tomorrow. I've arranged for classes to continue in the estate's east wing until the building is weatherproof. Their ability to manage multiple crises simultaneously while maintaining clear communication and mutual support impressed even Miss Evangeline, who observed their coordination with obvious admiration. Your partnership has become remarkable, she commented privately to Isadora. You anticipate each other's needs and decisions without constant consultation. The observation was accurate. Months of collaboration had developed an intuitive understanding of each other's approach to problems, enabling them to work efficiently even under pressure without requiring extensive discussion of every decision. More significantly, the crisis revealed how naturally they now shared domestic responsibilities that had once been carefully divided between his estate management and her household oversight. The emergency had blurred traditional boundaries, and neither felt inclined to restore rigid separation of duties once normal operations resumed. I find I prefer our integrated approach to managing responsibilities, Isadora mentioned one evening as they reviewed repair progress over a simple meal in their private sitting room. More efficient, Alaric agreed. but also more satisfying. Our combined judgment produces better decisions than either of us might make independently. The acknowledgement carried implications about their marriage's evolution toward genuine partnership in all aspects of their shared life rather than merely professional collaboration. As spring arrived, bringing news of their second expansion school's success and inquiries about establishing additional programs, they faced a decision about the future direction of their initiative and their relationship's continued development. The secretary suggests we might consider expanding beyond domestic service education, Alaric said, sharing the latest governmental correspondence. Agricultural training, basic commerce, perhaps even teacher preparation for rural areas. Ambitious, Isadora replied, considering the implications. Also potentially transformative for regional development. Would require years of intensive collaboration to implement properly. The observation was made quietly, acknowledging that expanded professional commitments would mean their partnership would continue developing under demanding circumstances that would either strengthen their relationship or reveal its limitations. Are you prepared for that level of commitment? She asked, the question encompassing both professional and personal dimensions. With you? Yes. His response was immediate and certain. I can't imagine undertaking something this significant with anyone else. Isadora felt a flutter of warmth at his confidence in their partnership, followed by the realization that she felt the same certainty about their collaboration and its personal meaning. Then we should accept the expansion, she said, making the decision that would shape their future. Together. That evening, as they walked through their gardens discussing implementation strategies for their enlarged mandate, their conversation drifted toward more personal reflection on how their relationship had evolved and what its continued development might involve. We've created something neither of us expected, Isadora observed, stopping near the rose garden where they had first discussed their school's potential. Something better than either of us expected, Alaric corrected gently. Professional partnership that has become genuine personal affection. The acknowledgement was made without dramatic flourishes, but with the kind of honest recognition that characterized their relationship's natural development toward deeper emotional connection. I love working with you, she said simply, the admission encompassing multiple aspects of their shared life. But more than that, I love spending time with you. Talking with you. Planning with you. I feel the same, he replied, moving closer as they stood among the early spring flowers. Our collaboration has become the most satisfying aspect of my life. The moment felt significant but not forced, their growing emotional connection expressing itself naturally within the context of their shared objectives and mutual respect. Where do we go from here? Isadora asked, meaning both their expanded educational initiative and their relationship's continued evolution. Forward, Alaric replied, reaching for her hand with the kind of gentle intentionality that suggested personal affection founded on demonstrated compatibility. Together. Taking our time to develop both our professional work and our personal connection at whatever pace feels right. As they walked back toward the house, hands linked for the first time in their marriage, Isadora felt profound satisfaction with what they had built together and genuine excitement about their future possibilities. Their arranged beginning had created space for something authentically meaningful to develop, and that development was proving more fulfilling than she had dared imagine. Their partnership had evolved beyond functional cooperation toward genuine affection founded on mutual respect, shared accomplishments, and growing emotional intimacy. Whatever their expanded responsibilities would bring, they would face them as true partners in every sense. Professional collaborators, intellectual companions, and perhaps, in time, genuinely devoted spouses whose marriage had transcended its arranged origins to become something chosen and cherished. The future held possibilities that felt both exciting and secure, grounded in the solid foundation they had carefully built together. The second year of their expanded mandate brought challenges that would define both their professional legacy and their personal relationship's ultimate direction. The agricultural training program proved more complex than anticipated, requiring them to spend weeks in rural communities understanding local farming practices and economic pressures. These extended periods away from familiar surroundings deepened their partnership in unexpected ways. Sharing simple accommodations in village inns, working alongside local farmers to understand their educational needs, and navigating the delicate politics of rural communities drew them into closer collaboration than formal drawing rooms had ever required. The yield improvements from basic literacy alone would justify the program, Isadora observed as they reviewed data collected from their pilot agricultural sites. But the enhancement in record-keeping and market planning could transform entire regions. Assuming we can convince traditionalists that education enhances rather than threatens established farming practices, Alaric replied, studying correspondence from village leaders who remained skeptical about formal training for agricultural workers. Their ability to address such concerns had become seamless, with each instinctively understanding how to build upon the other's arguments to create more persuasive presentations. More importantly, their intellectual partnership had evolved to include the kind of easy affection that made even challenging work genuinely enjoyable. Summer brought the triumphant opening of their third expansion school and news that their model was inspiring independent initiatives across multiple regions. More significantly, it brought their first major personal milestone when Isadora realized she was expecting their first child. "Are you pleased?" Alaric asked gently when she shared her news, his expression mixing excitement with tender concern. "I'm discovering that joy can coexist with practical considerations," she replied honestly. "We've built something remarkable together. Now we're creating someone who will grow up understanding what genuine partnership looks like. Our child will inherit the best of both worlds," he said, reaching for her hands in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing between them. Educational innovation and a family founded on mutual respect. As autumn arrived with its harvest of accomplishments, successful schools, transformed communities, and the growing promise of their expanding family, they stood together in their garden where so many important conversations had taken place. "When I first proposed this school," Isadora reflected, her hand resting on the gentle curve that would soon become their child, "I never imagined it would transform everything: our communities, our purpose, our marriage itself." "The best transformations often begin with small, practical steps," Alaric replied, his arms settling comfortably around her shoulders. "We simply had the wisdom to let our partnership develop naturally." Around them, the evidence of their success was visible not just in the thriving school and prosperous estate, but in the easy intimacy of two people who had discovered that the most satisfying love could grow from mutual respect, shared purpose, and the daily choice to build something meaningful together. "Do you think we've succeeded?" she asked, meaning not just their educational initiatives, but their marriage's transformation from dutiful arrangement to genuine devotion. "Look around us," he said quietly. "Students preparing for meaningful careers, communities embracing change, other regions seeking to replicate our model. And us, two people who began as strangers and became." He paused, searching for words adequate to their reality. "Partners in every sense that matters," she completed, the phrase encompassing their professional collaboration, intellectual companionship, and the deep emotional connection that had surprised them both with its strength. "Partners," he agreed, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. "In every sense that matters." As winter's first snow began to fall, covering their garden in pristine silence, they remained standing together, contemplating a future that stretched ahead full of promise. Their child would be born into a world where education created opportunity, where partnerships could transcend their origins, and where love, real, lasting, satisfying love, could be built as deliberately and carefully as any worthy enterprise. Their arranged marriage had become the foundation for everything they valued most: meaningful work that improved lives, a partnership that strengthened under pressure, and now a family that would inherit not just title and property, but the understanding that the best relationships were those chosen daily through kindness, respect, and shared commitment to something larger than themselves. In transforming education, they had discovered something far more valuable. They had transformed themselves and each other, creating from duty's foundation a love story written in practical choices, mutual support, and the quiet satisfaction of building something beautiful together. Their success was measured not in grand gestures or passionate declarations, but in the steady happiness of two people who had found in each other exactly what neither had known to seek: a true partner for all of life's adventures, challenges, and joys.